Welcome to Sweet Tea and Coffee. My name is Blake Russell, and I'm sitting across from our co-host for the season, John James. Say hello, John.
It's great to be here. I'm enjoying my coffee today out of my classic Spider-Man mug.
Spider-Man mug.
I'm excited about the new movie, but I'm more excited about today's podcast.
See, I didn't even know there was a new movie. There's a new movie.
I can teach you the
John.
ways.
John keeps me up to date on all these superhero movies because I just haven't been keeping up with it at all. But hey, this is going to be a good episode today. We have a very special guest with us, Mr. Stephen Shrewsbury, and we are excited to get to know him today. And you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. All right. Well, like I said, we have Stephen Shrewsbury in. Can we say the studio? We've got it in the studio. It looks like a studio in here now. I've got some more recording equipment, and mics are all over the place. So I think we can call it a studio.
Let's do it.
Not the studio, because we have a different room in this building that's called the studio. That makes no sense. But we've got Stephen in a studio today, and we're going to get to know Stephen. How long have you been at Fredonia Hill now? Not long.
We came about 15 months ago or so.
Okay.
I think was when we first started to attend.
Very cool.
Yeah, what I love is that you guys have, and you came in a crazy time, an odd time, to come join.
As soon as we
church.
could get back in person,
You were here.
we were here.
And that's what I loved about you guys is that you've been jumping in and 100% since you've been here. That's been great.
Well, it's the habit we developed over many, many years of military service. We would jump from assignment to assignment to assignment every 2 to 3 years for almost, I was a military officer for 30 years.
Yeah.
And so when we would get to a new place, you didn't have any time to spend a year and a half surveying the church,
Shopping.
figuring out, how will I fit in? You had to
Jump in.
If you didn't jump in, you didn't get involved.
Well, that's interesting. Like, and we're just going to go straight into it because you already mentioned it. I am a huge history nut, and because of that, I have military history is like my thing. I love military history, and so I saw that you were retired from the Air Force, and I thought, oh, this is going to be a lot of fun for me just to kind of hear some of what you did. So you retired as a lieutenant colonel, right?
No, I was a full colonel.
Oh, you were full colonel.
Yeah, I was even what they would call an old colonel.
Wow.
I was a colonel for a long time.
Wow.
And the younger colonels wanted me to get out of the way.
Okay, yeah, get this guy out of the way so we can have some more space.
Yeah.
So, well, tell me about your journey in the military. How did you end up in the service?
I grew up in the Denver area, and it was in the early '80s when I graduated from college. I was started out trying to become a professional airline pilot.
Okay,
and went through some flight training and realized very quickly that the cost at that time and the pay of a pilot at that time was very, very low. It's nothing like today's economy, where you can get a job today and pretty easily. And if you wanted to be a pilot today, you'd have a future career instantly. But back then it was rough.
Yeah.
So I just simply couldn't get a job in my field. And so I was just walking down a hallway in a building one day, and I saw a poster. And it was for the Navy, actually. And they had a job called a supply officer, and I thought, okay, I'm desperate. I'm going to do something.
Right.
And I went and tested for the Navy and did well, and I was close to applying for the Navy, and I saw this other poster for the Air Force, and they had a lot of other jobs, and I said, those jobs sound more interesting.
Yeah.
And I don't really want to spend 8 months on ships, which they'd started doing back in that time frame. Ronald Reagan was still president back then. That's how long ago it was.
Yeah.
And so I applied for the Air Force and was accepted. So I didn't come into the service until I was 25 years old.
Okay. So did you come in as an officer or?
Yeah, I went to officer training school in San Antonio, first time in Texas
Yeah.
at that time, and did my officer training, and then was commissioned and went to my first duty station, which was in Panama City, Florida, at a place called Tyndall Air Force Base.
Okay, yeah, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law both they're married. They were both in the Air Force for a long time, so I'm kind of familiar with the Air Force. Does seem to have a lot of different places specialties, I guess, for you to kind of explore and serve in. I think they were both aerospace physiologists or something. I hope I'm saying that correctly, but they worked with U-2 pilots and got them ready for,
Yeah,
high
I know
altitude.
exactly what that position is.
Yeah. So that's what they did. Okay, so but you mentioned you're an attorney.
Right. I started out as a fighter controller.
Okay.
And that's what my wife did. I met her at Tyndall Air Force Base.
Okay.
She was also a controller. She did air defense controlling. I did fighter controlling. We were testing air-to-air weapons.
Okay.
So fighter pilots would take off with weapons, and then we would control them to set up weapons tests for for that, and then we also would control them for air-to-air combat encounters that they would practice
Right.
with each other for combat training. I did that for about 5 years, and about 3 years into it, I had heard about an Air Force program that would allow you to switch your career to the JAG,
Okay.
and which is the lawyer part of the
Yeah.
Air Force.
I mean, that
And,
was real popular back in the 90s with the TV show, the
Yep.
JAG.
Yeah. We did everything.
Yeah.
I never did secret missions on submarines. I can
Okay.
tell you
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
for
They
sure.
probably added a little
that-
bit more to that.
that was nothing I had a chance to do. So, so I spent 3 years actually. 3 times I tried to apply for that program. I was turned down a couple times, and on the third and last opportunity, I was accepted.
Awesome.
And so I transferred over to law school. I married Lori at that time, just before I left Tyndall Air Force Base, and I went to Salt Lake City to start a law degree at the University of Utah.
Okay.
So you talk about getting your law degree in Utah. Did you already have your undergrad when you first joined the Air Force?
I did, yep. I had received my undergrad degree about 3 years prior, actually. It was just 3 difficult years of not being
Trying
able
to
to
figure
find
out what
work.
Yeah.
It was just a very different type of economy back then.
Where'd you go for your undergrad?
I went to a school called Metropolitan State College of Denver, now Metropolitan State University. Very large, totally urban. It's in downtown Denver. So it was a university, had no fraternities, sororities, no sports teams. It was pure education.
Right.
And it was very inexpensive.
That
My
helps.
tuition was $500 a semester.
Yep, sign me up.
Yeah.
That's what I want.
Incredible.
So Denver, in a lot of ways, would you say Denver feels like home for you? Or you've traveled so much and you've relocated so often.
I call Denver home, although I didn't move there till I was 10 years old. My family background is very, very unusual. I lived all over as a young child. I was born in Salt Lake City. My father was a Mormon fundamentalist.
Wow.
And so I grew up in a fundamentalist family. And what I mean by that is there was polygamy involved.
Sure.
Wow.
And not in my own family directly, no, but all around.
You knew
us.
people around. Yeah.
Sure, my uncles had more than one wife, and fundamental Mormonism. And we could spend all day talking about fundamental Mormonism, but essentially, the reason they're called fundamentalists and they broke away from the main Mormon church, the LDS church, is because there was somebody in whatever group. There was a whole bunch of these groups that felt that they were really the true prophet. The Mormon church is headed by a prophet.
Yeah.
And they felt that wasn't that person wasn't the true prophet. They were the true prophet. And in my group, there was a guy who was running our group called Joel. His name was Joel LeBaron. LeBaron is a well-known name in the fundamentalist world, and he had a polygamy colony that he had built down in northern Mexico in the Chihuahua area called Colonial LeBaron. And this was a small community of polygamists that belonged to his particular sect or group.
Wow.
So when I was 3, we moved down there for the first time, and we lived there a few months, maybe a year. We moved from there. My dad tried logging trees and almost got himself killed. Quit that. we ended up in Washington State. He was went into drywall with two of his brothers. So we lived in Washington State for a few years. Then we moved back down to the polygamy colony when I was 9.
Wow.
And we were there about a year. And when I was 10, we moved to Denver, and we left that group. And the reason we left is my dad had become a Scientologist at that time.
Wow.
And so I quickly moved into that. I became a Scientologist at the age of 11.
Crazy.
And I did that for 5 years quite seriously.
Huh.
And I know it sounds a little nutty. You think about an 11-year-old. I can't even imagine it now. But,
yeah.
but Scientology theory, that's a whole nother story. But everybody is billions of years old in Scientology theory because it's a reincarnation religion. And so I didn't get treated like an 11-year-old. And I always was one of those kids that liked to hang with
Right.
one of those weird kids,
yeah.
like to hang with the adults and stuff.
I was kind of that way
And,
too.
yeah, and it was a way for me to do it. And so I actually quit school. I quit. I never went to the 5th grade. I spent 1 year working down at a Scientology mission in downtown Denver.
Wow.
And for the 5th grade. And after 6th grade, I didn't go to 7th grade. I was sent to L.A. With that, when I say I was sent to L.A., I meant I was sent there. My parents didn't come. I went to live in L.A. in a Scientology hotel that still exists down there called the Celebrity Center, where all the wealthy Scientologists would live. And I went to live with a friend of my mom's who had a lot of money, and she was also a Scientologist going through some training there. So I spent several months going through what was called auditing training, basically Scientology training. And after I got through with that course, I wanted to stay in LA and keep going.
Yeah.
But the Scientology mission here in Denver called me back. So I went back, and my parents
You're
were
about 8th grade when you go back, or?
I go back. I'm still. This is the spring of my would have been the spring of my 7th grade year. So I go back, and within a couple of months, my parents announced they were getting divorced, and I'm the oldest of 7 children. So my dad and the three older boys, including me, went down to Colorado Springs. My mom, with the 4 younger, stayed in Denver, and so I continued working at the Scientology mission in Colorado Springs when I was in the 9th grade. I also skipped the 8th grade completely. I didn't go to most of 7th grade.
Wow.
I didn't go to 5th grade, and I didn't go to 8th grade.
I've been in 8th grade, and it's overrated.
Yeah, you
So
probably
you
didn't
miss
right,
much.
yeah, that's what I hear.
Okay, so, and maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but I mean, so it seems like you were pretty deep in all this. How did that transition out of that happen?
Well, psychology is an interesting thing. You start to realize as you get older, if you had some issues with your child in terms of your unhappiness or level of happiness. When you're a child, sometimes you don't even know if you're unhappy.
Right.
I mean, you are, but you don't really know that there's another way.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was a fairly unhappy child. And so I found myself in the 9th grade. I was school, and then we would actually drive to Colorado Springs, and for several months we would drive from Colorado Springs up to Denver every night.
Wow.
To work at the Scientology mission in Denver, and it was exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
And I became disillusioned with the whole idea of Scientology. It became very real to me that it wasn't very real.
Yeah.
And I just wanted out. I just wanted out of the whole thing. And so at 16, I left Colorado Springs, moved out from my dad's place, and I moved in with my mom up in Denver. She had escaped. She was also a Scientologist for a lot of years. And she had left Scientology a couple of years before that. And so I said, I want a normal life.
Yeah.
I just want to be a normal kid. And so I went up to Denver, and that's where I started high school.
Well, let's go back a little bit because I'm curious. Being so ingrained in the Scientology community, you talked about making treks from Colorado to Denver every night. Um, what was it like to actually be a part of that community as a young teenager? Like, what were some of the practices that you found yourself doing? Was it just a lot of uh, of, of information that was given to you, and that you just participated in teaching, or what was that like to be a part of that community?
It was, well, Scientology is a cult. That's
Right.
100%.
Yeah.
So, I as a Sunday school teacher, I taught on the quasi-Christian religions for years and years. And of course, Scientology is one that I touch on because it's not a quasi-Christian religion, but it's one I touch on because it's the epitome of a cult. It has all the indices of what a cult is. And so it's far more than just the theory or the training. It's the envelopment of cult behavior. The cult type group will always feel that it's us against them. That's one of the fundamental
Right.
principles. Cults tend to use their own language, cult speak, I call it. And Scientology had its own language. It had its own ideas about what human perfection was and how to achieve human perfection. And human perfection was achieved through what was called the auditing process, which is what I had trained to do in L.A. And this auditing process basically involved sitting with a counselor, we called an auditor, and that auditor would go through these processes to try to get the auditee to remember their past lives, and then remember bad things that would happen in their past lives, and then they would have this would result in what Scientologists would call a cognition. And what I mean by that is you'd realize, my problem with my bad knee, or my problem with being angry today is caused
As a
because of
result of
some
something.
incident that happened, 55
Yeah.
lifetimes ago or something like that. And and this process is very, very long in Scientology. I mean, it can take years to get through the process. It's one of the most expensive religions in the world. It's about $300,000 now to go from the entry level all the way to the top.
Wow.
And so in order to, who can afford 300,000? Most people don't have that kind of money.
Yeah.
So the way Scientology would help get people involved was they would have people come to work for Scientology, and then they would give those people their auditing for free. And that was the hook. And so you didn't get paid much. I think we were paid less than minimum wage
Right.
to work there. So
Right. That's really interesting. So, in the midst of, I guess, you growing up, you're piecing things together, some from Mormonism, some from Scientology, some from just the world and the culture around you. And in the midst of that, you kind of came to the conclusion, Scientology is clearly, there's nothing here. There's no truth to it. And so you have a really different experience of coming to a reality of knowing Christ and knowing what that reality looks like. And, as you began to piece all that together, what was it like for you on that journey of exploring truth and figuring out what's really truth here? Because so many people are telling me different things.
that's a great question. After I left Scientology, I swore off religion totally.
I can imagine.
I
Yeah,
absolutely
makes
hated
sense.
it.
Yeah.
And I had nothing to do with it for quite a few years. I didn't really give religion much thought at all. It was a non-issue for me. My religion, if you want to call it that, became education. Education became the way for me to escape my circumstances. And I became very focused. Nobody in my family had ever gone to college. I was the first one to do that because I felt it was the way to escape.
Yeah.
And the Air Force was part of that process. I realized I wasn't getting anywhere in Denver, and I said, I've got to get out. I've got to escape. And so in many ways, the Air Force was a lifesaver for me. It was the first time I had a job that I enjoyed. I still had nothing to do with religion at that time.
Right.
And moved to Florida and was beginning to have a successful career at that time. And several years later, maybe 3 or 4 years later, probably about 4 years after I got to Tyndall Air Force Base, I realized that there were still holes. There was something wrong.
Still wasn't adding up. Yeah.
And I was in my late 20s by then. I had had a series of girlfriends. Some I fell in love with. They didn't love me.
Yeah.
Others, they loved me. I didn't fall in love with them. That type of drill. And I became very frustrated because I was at this time 29 and I just couldn't figure out what to do about this love thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to a bookstore in Panama City, and I said, well, what do you got to do when you need to fix your love life? You go get a self-help book.
Yeah.
So I walked into the bookstore, and I saw this book called The Road Less Traveled. Now, The Road Less Traveled was a well-known Christian book in the 70s. I didn't know that at that time. But it was split into 3 parts, and the first part was called Love. The whole section, Love.
Yeah.
And I said, okay,
It's a good place to
this
start.
sounds good.
Yeah.
I'm getting this book. So I read this book. Well, the last third of the book, I don't even remember what the middle third of the book was, but the last third of the book was entitled Grace. And so I read that and I went, that's kind of interesting. And I just started to realize that I was realizing something. And of course, that was the Holy Spirit wooing me, opening my eyes a little bit. And not very long after that, I was set up essentially on a blind date with my now wife. And my wife was a born and raised Southern Baptist.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't date church girls.
Yeah.
I didn't date church girls. But we were set up on a blind date, and we really got along well together. And so I asked her if she would go with me, because I thought, I'm going to try out some of these church things and see what they are. So I don't know how a Southern Baptist ever brought herself to do this, but she went with me to the Presbyterian church, and we went to the Methodist church, and I think a couple other denominations.
I mean, she must have really cared about you to explore that with you.
Yeah, she was crazy about me.
Yeah.
No, I don't. I really don't know why she was doing this, but she did, and she knew I was
searching.
You got to keep in mind, I knew zero
Yeah.
about Christianity.
So you're 29 at this point, right?
Yes.
And you swore off religion at the age of 13?
No, it was 16.
16. So this is 13 years
Yes.
of, I don't want to touch it. I want nothing to do with it. Probably even a hardening of your heart toward it. I would definitely believe so. And in the midst of that, a Christian book and a Southern Baptist girl allow you to, I guess, begin the process. God uses those things, right? He said he wooed you. We love to see God's pursuit of us, and you're clearly articulating that. And so in the midst of all of that, like, your heart is beginning to be interested. Did you find yourself kind of going, what am I doing here? Why am I intrigued by this? Like,
I don't really remember asking myself, why am I doing this? Am I nuts? That sort of reaction. I just was very interested. And so ultimately, we, in the church trying out thing, I said, well, let's try out this Southern Baptist church, right? And this Southern Baptist church down the road from the apartment I lived in. And I really liked it. And so I started to go to the church with Lori, who I was dating at that time. Lori's my wife. And we were going there fairly regularly, no Sunday school, anything like that. I didn't want to get involved in any of that stuff. But I was really seeing and seeing a different way, seeing something new. And this went on for a number of months. I started dating my wife in September, and I accepted the Lord. I finally surrendered and gave up. And it was the following May that I did that. And so this wasn't a short process.
Yeah.
I was a very hardened individual.
Yeah.
And that hardness had to be softened quite a bit.
You know, you say it wasn't a short process, but I also feel like, considering the circumstances, that seems remarkably quick.
Yeah.
To just, what is that,
What
8
the Lord
months?
can do. Yeah.
You go from where you were. I mean, that's phenomenal just to hear God's pursuit of you and how that church played that role. So what was that like for you internally as you began to process, I believe in Jesus, I believe in salvation, and like, what was that like for you?
Well, it's almost a little bit tough to remember. I just remember when I would hear preaching particularly from the New Testament and from the Gospels. It was just the compassion that Jesus had, and the care that he had was just so attractive. It was just so beautiful. And my wife tells me now, for several weeks prior to May of 1992, which was the month that I accepted the Lord, month and year I accepted the Lord, she said I was squishing the pew. Okay, so in the old Southern Baptist,
Yeah.
we had an invitation, we had pews, you'd stand up, and she said I was gripping the back of the pew in front
Like
of me.
you're holding on for
and
dear
I was
life.
holding on, right. She literally said that.
Yeah.
And I just, one Sunday, the pastor was preaching on this incident where Jesus is walking through a crowd, and the woman with the bleeding issue touches the hem of his garment, and he feels power leaving him, and he has a discussion with her, and that compassion and love that he showed to that woman, and the idea that she could have healing and a future because she exercised and had faith and believed
Right.
who he was, who he said he was. And that was it. I was like, my wife says I was shaking, holding the back of that pew, and I said, that's it.
Wow.
And I walked up. I said, that's it. And I've never looked back.
Well, that's incredible. So you spent many years in the military, and my next question is, how in the world did you end up here in Nacogdoches?
We had I spent the first 15 years or so in the United States, and in the Air Force. I mean, the military services are outstanding educational organizations. They train internally, and I don't know why more young people don't consider the military.
Yeah.
I really don't understand it, because it's such a fantastic opportunity. I suspect it's because the wars and PTSD and some of the rough stuff, and I get that. But for us, the Air Force had yet another program. After I'd been a lawyer for a few years, I was prosecuting criminal cases, and I said, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm not having fun prosecuting cases. I'm tired of being around criminal behavior. I don't want to look at things anymore. I was prosecuting child pornography cases.
It's just
and
negativity.
I just didn't want to. I just didn't want to be around it. And so the Air Force had a Master of Law program where they would send senior colonels or junior majors, and I was a major at that time. To a school in Virginia, at the University of Virginia. It's called the Army Judge Advocate General School, to get a Master of Law in something. And I wanted to get a Master of Law in international law. I thought that'd be fun.
Yeah.
And so I was selected in my last year of eligibility. So I was the oldest student in our Air Force class. There was a class of only 10. I was the most senior student there, and spent a year getting an LLM. Full-time, being paid by the Air Force to get
Wow.
an advanced degree. And then I decided, hey, why don't we go to an embassy, do something interesting. And the Air Force had a short notice assignment in Athens, Greece. And so Lori and I, we'd been married 10 years by now, and
Yeah.
we still had no children, but we had decided that this was the right time.
Right.
And so while I was in school, Lori was pregnant, and our first daughter, Caitlin, was born in Charlottesville. And within a couple of months, we went from Charlottesville to Washington. I had to do a lot of anti-terrorism training. I had to train in the Greek language and do some other things to get ready for Athens, which was a very high terrorist threat area at that time.
Yeah.
And we moved to Athens, and we never came back to the United States. So that's we did not come back. We were in Athens, then we went to Guam, and then we went to Stuttgart, Germany.
Wow.
And then we went to Honolulu. That was a terrible place to live. Then we went to Tokyo, Japan for 3 years, and then we went to air base near Cambridge in the UK.
Okay.
And that's where we were living when I had to retire.
Okay.
So the long answer is I needed something to do. And I did not want to go back to work as a civilian in the government.
Right.
And I'd always enjoyed teaching. I started doing that when I was 11 years old as a Scientologist. And I thought, well, this might be interesting.
Yeah.
And so I just started looking around for teaching jobs at a university where they were looking for lawyers, JDs, not a PhD, but a JD,
Right.
which is a Juris Doctorate degree. And there were not many, but there was this one university, and I'd never heard of it in this town. I'd never heard of, and they were looking for a lawyer who had international law experience.
Well, there you go.
And I said, okay. And I applied for that job and got a reply right away. And they asked if they could interview me. This was my now employer, Stephen F. Austin. And so they interviewed me by phone in England for about an hour and a half because I was a very unusual candidate to teach at a university.
Yeah.
They interviewed me for an hour and a half. I retired. My wife and I had 2 kids at the time, and we left in the spring of 17, and we went to Florida to live because we had no place to live. We didn't know where to live in the United States, so we moved to Central Florida, that area where my wife Lori grew up.
Okay.
It was also a cheap place to live that we could stay until we figure out where I could get a job.
Yeah.
And after I arrived in Florida, the university here, Stephen F. Austin, called me, said, we want you to come out, fly out for an interview. And so Lori and I flew out here in, I think it was May.
Okay.
May of 17, we flew out here, and we went through the interview process here, and I got to quit doing that clicking with my lip thing, too. I've got that same problem, don't I?
That's the John James signature right there.
And so we interviewed. It went very well.
Yeah.
And there was a hiring freeze at Stephen F. Austin at that time, so I had to wait a few more weeks after that, not knowing if I would get
That's going to work out. Yeah.
get the job. And late May, maybe early June, I received a phone call asking if I would like the position, and I said, sure. So we moved here in August of 17, and we've been here ever since. That's how we ended up in this town called Nacogdoches.
Wow, that's
no
that's
roots, no connection to
right.
Texas
Yeah,
at all.
that always intrigues me because I mean my roots go really deep here. I mean that's my family's been here since the 1800s, you know. So it's like when I ask that question, I'm truly interested in how people end up in this little town tucked away in the piney woods of East Texas, and so and knowing your background of being all over the world, it's really neat to see.
Oh, and just even to think about, you've encountered so many different cultures in the places that you've lived in the way of life, and then all of a sudden you end up in deep East Texas with good old East Texas boys like Blake's family.
Yeah.
Do you feel like there was a little bit of culture shock when you came here, or you just felt like, well, just add one more culture to the list that I've interacted with? Or
It wasn't really culture shock, just because I'd been exposed to. We'd lived in South Carolina, and
Okay.
I'd lived in
Sure.
Panama City, which is really the south
Right.
of
Yeah.
Florida, and of course many cultures. And so there wasn't so much a culture shock. I really knew what to expect, but it was very important for my kids. My kids were teenagers. They're still teenagers, and they had never lived in the United States, not other than visiting Denver and Florida, and that was
crazy.
it. They'd
Yeah.
never seen anything in the United States, and they were very tired of moving and very tired of changing schools. And so I made a agreement with my wife that we're going to settle someplace, and we were going to allow our kids to go to high school the whole time, because that was very important to me. After I escaped from Scientology, that became a very important thing to me, to be able to go to one high school.
Yeah.
And so we decided, no matter what we did, we would do this
stick
and
it
allow
out,
the kids to settle in and begin to travel around the United States and show our kids the country that they're from. They
That's
hold
just
their
incredible to
citizenship
think about.
in,
It's like their entire lives they just didn't really know much of the United States.
very, very little of it.
Yeah. That's crazy. So you have a long list of places that you guys lived. Is there any one particular place that you enjoyed the most or liked the most or anything?
Nacogdoches.
Other than Nacogdoches. Yeah.
We do love Nacogdoches. I mean, I'll get back to the original question. But
Yeah.
I will. So we love Nacogdoches. When we were interviewing for our job here, we talked to people, and we would talk to young people who said, "I love it here."
Yeah.
We would talk to young professionals who said, "I went to Stephen F. Austin. I went and moved to Dallas and worked, or some other city and worked, and then we came back and lived here." And we would talk to older people, and they loved it. And we said, people love this town. And that gave us confidence to stay here. But favorite-wise, other than Nacogdoches, I will say that's a tough question. Really, Greece is in our hearts. It's not because it was an easy place to live. Living in Athens could be a tough city to live in. But the people and the culture of Greece, being around Greek Orthodox, which is a very interesting Christian denomination, the second largest in the world, and just the things we learned. We were always attracted. I think maybe it's because it was our first overseas assignment, but we've loved them all.
Yeah.
We loved, and we lived on Guam for 3 years, tiny little island in the middle of nowhere, 12 miles long and 5 miles wide.
Yeah. Yeah.
But somehow it gets under your skin.
Yeah. So there's just not one. There's not one that's like, that was awful. We'll never. That wish we weren't spent time there. They were all great.
The only awful place I was ever at that I don't ever want to return to was not an assignment where I took my family. It was a little short notice assignment that I had when I was a colonel. I was asked to fly off on 10 days' notice to Kabul, Afghanistan, and replace an individual out there for a few months. And this was at a very rough. This was in 2011.
Okay. Yeah.
Right in, I arrived in August, right before the 10-year anniversary of September 11, and we were suffering a lot of attacks. At that time from the Taliban, even in the city we were located. I was working for the commander of the ISAF force in Afghanistan at that time, and the embassy was right next to us, and we were just suffering a lot of peripheral attacks. And about a week after I arrived there, we had a major attack that occurred that took about 18 hours to put down, and that began a very rough period, but a growing period. I mean, God works all things out, and I hated being there, but He also grew me, and I wouldn't change it now.
Yeah, I saw. I think I saw a photo of you during that time, and I mean, you were outfitted in body armor and all the things. That it's got to be a weird place to be in that moment, knowing how dangerous an area that is, and you just don't know what could happen at any given time.
I really empathize and admire military members who go far beyond just
Yeah.
sitting in a compound in Kabul, Afghanistan, and
Yeah.
have had to gone out and actually do the rough stuff.
Yeah.
My hat goes off to veterans. I think the world of them, and not because I'm one of them, but because I know what these men and women have done.
You
It's
just
incredible.
I got a small taste of kind of what that could be like, and that being, I've got friends who went on deployment, and that was their entire life was that all the time, and
Yeah.
it's a struggle, and a lot of them still deal with that. It's
They
a tough
do.
thing.
That's the downside sometimes of military services. Fortunately, we're not in constant wars right now. It's actually a really good time to be in military
right.
service because the deployments are way down
Right.
generally. Not so much for the Navy, but it can be a rough thing to deal with PTSD and some of the things you see. And but at the same time, if you talk to most military veterans, I think they will tell you they wouldn't trade it. There was something about that bonding process or that service process, serving their country, that really meant something.
Yeah, it was significant in their lives.
So on a much lighter note here, I want to ask a question of the people. What the people really want to know
Okay.
is, now, you've lived in a lot of different places. You lived in Greece, you've lived in islands, you've lived in the United States, et cetera, et cetera. Where was the best food? Who has the best food?
Man.
And because I'm sure your
Somebody's-
diet must
yeah.
have changed all the time based upon the region that you were in. Like to go from island food to go from was it eating Greece? Like that's totally different. And so who has the best food?
Of the places we lived, I would pick Greek food in a heartbeat. But German food comes close second. The German, when I went to Germany with Lori and our kids, we thought German food was sausages.
Sausages, yeah.
That's literally what
Sauerkraut.
we thought. We thought we'd be eating sausages and sauerkraut.
Yeah.
That didn't sound that interesting, but German cuisine was far more interesting.
Wow.
Bread, I mean, it's very, very good. But Greek food, we still cook at home quite often. But we weren't picky. I mean,
You really couldn't be.
Hawaii has some
Right.
of its own cuisine. Japanese cuisine, there was a lot of that we just really loved as well.
What's a traditional German dinner?
Well, schnitzel is the national
Okay.
dish, and so you can get various types of what they call schnitzel, which is basically a breaded fried pork, but it's nothing like we would do in the U.S. It's thin, it's cooked in butter, and you can get a taste. You can go to there's a couple of German restaurants in New Braunfels.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you want a taste of German food, you can really get a taste of it. But so schnitzel is a big one. But Germans were very big on bread and salads, believe it or not. So they would have I just called them multi breads. It would be a big loaf of bread, and it was actually 8 different kinds of bread. They would put 8 blobs on a plate in a circle, and the blobs would all bake together. And so you'd have 8 different kinds of bread on a if you can imagine, like on a big pizza, a large
Right,
pizza
yeah.
pie plate, and you'd have pumpkin seeds, and it just yummy. I'm hungry now.
Yeah, yeah. What time is it? It's getting close to lunchtime. Hey, well, we're so glad that you joined us. I have learned a lot about a lot of things today.
I am so amazed by God's pursuit of you. It is phenomenal.
Yeah,
it
just a really neat
sparks
story.
my heart with joy. I'm currently 29 years old, and to hear that at my age, God changed your life dramatically. I don't know. It's just incredibly encouraging. So
Yeah, I as one who came to the Lord I was actually 30 when I actually came to the Lord. I'm really very passionate about the idea of witnessing to people, no matter how old they are,
Right, yeah.
and going after them with invitations And no matter how frustrating it can get in a church to bring people to the Lord, sometimes I came because I was asked to come, and asked and pursued and asked, not, and God pursued me, but so did God's people.
Right. Yeah.
And so most of my family members are not saved. Even today, I have a couple of siblings that have come to the Lord in the time since that, but that's it.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of passionate about keep after people. Don't give up on them just because they've become hardened. They will become hard. They become harder and harder and harder as they get older and older, but it's still possible.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's a good word for our whole church. If you're sitting there listening to this podcast, invite your friend to church and cook them a German cuisine afterwards.
Well, we say this almost every time we have a guest, but it seems like we've only scratched the surface, and we appreciate you sharing what you've shared. And we were talking before the podcast, it's been really neat to see how these stories have sparked other conversations and relationships within our church. And I'm sure Stephen would be thrilled if you came up to him and asked him about some of this stuff and got to know him. We're so thankful that you and Lori are in our church family now, and just excited to see what's in the future. So thank you very much for sitting down with John and I today.
You're welcome.
To have this conversation.
It was a great pleasure talking to you guys.
Hey, well, we are not too far away from our Q&A episode. We've got a handful of questions, but we need more. So make sure to send those to us at stc@fredoniahill.org. John and I, we mentioned about doing some sort of social media questionnaire thing. We will do that. So follow us on Instagram, John and I, or the church's Instagram. When we get a little bit closer to that, we will post that up, and we will take your questions there as well. But if you have them now, we'll go ahead and take those. I'll compile those up, and we've got some good ones so far, and we're excited about that. Any other thoughts on that, John?
Man, I'm excited about that episode. I think every morning I wake up, and before my feet hit the floor, I think that Q&A episode's coming. I can't wait. It's the only thought I have as soon as I wake up in the morning. So
okay.
I cannot wait for this episode.
So don't let John down for this episode. All right. Well, thank you for listening, and we hope you have a great day. Hey, we've got a check-in episode with Kendall here pretty soon, either next week or the week after that. And I'll just say I've been in contact with him. He's still alive, and he's not gone stir crazy yet. And so I'm excited to hear what he's been up to on the last few weeks. So have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
See y'all.